Welcome to the latest episode of the Informing Choices mini-pod. Deepfakes are a synthetic media that have been digitally manipulated, often using artificial intelligence and machine learning, to make it appear as if someone is saying something or doing something they never did. To achieve this, a person's face or voice is superimposed onto another person's body or audio recording. The most common methods are face swapping, where the face of one person is replaced with another, or lip syncing, where the mouth of one person is made to move in sync with the words spoken by another. Deepfakes, like pretty much any technology family, can be used for a variety of purposes, both good and bad. Some common purposes of deepfakes include entertainment, art, education, but also fraud, reputational damage, and other criminal activity. For today's podcast episode, I'm delighted to welcome Tunu Wamai, an economics and political science graduate from Minerva University and creator of Tech Policy, the Human Perspective blog. There'll be a link in the podcast details to the blog. And global futurist and metaverse strategist, Sylvia Gallusser. Welcome to both of you. We know that deepfakes has a very negative connotation, doesn't it? But as well as exploring the risks, I think it's really important that actually we explore and consider the opportunities of this phenomena. And I use that word because actually it's not a technology, it's the result of using technology, isn't it? So, Tunu, in your blog, you say the intersection of technology, identity, and influence demands thoughtful consideration. So let me start with you. Take us through your perspective on the risks.
Okay, hello, super happy to be here today. And yes, like you did mention in my blog, I did speak about the fact that we do need to have thoughtful consideration when looking at identity, when looking at scarcity and looking at deepfakes. And I think the best place to start before even we begin evaluating the risks would be kind of to introduce what the identity economy is. And if we look at the economics as a study of how we make choices when faced with scarcity, and how those choices shape behavior, then the economy becomes the playing field where scarcity exists, where scarcity, behavior, and choice exist. And then regarding the identity economy, if identity is the characteristic of something being what it is, or somebody being who they are, then the identity economy becomes where scarcity, behavior, and choice interact, where scarcity is where identity fits in this space. So when looking at the interactions or these interactions and understanding the risks, one of them is anthropomorphization, which is the attributing of human characteristics to non-human entities. In and of itself, it doesn't really pose a risk, it just is a thing. But when we look at it in the context of deepfakes, anthropomorphization is used a lot for advertisement and in the marketing industry, where, for example, a celebrity will license their face and voice to be used for the purpose of promoting a product, especially a product that's in line with their niche and a product that's in line with maybe what they're involved in. And then because the identity of the celebrity is very valued within the space that they exist in, then people are more incentivized to buy that good. So that isn't a risk in and of itself, but it does become a risk when we look at identity theft. So what happens when companies choose to use the faces and the identities of these high-profile individuals, because typically they're the ones who can exert influence. So use these their identities to advertise or to endorse products that they naturally would not endorse. Yes, of course, they can be taken to court and legal action can be taken, but the space and time between when the advertisement is aired and maybe when it's pulled down and the court case is taken there's already been too much time for damage to occur in this way. So looking at it also from not just the angle of the celebrities, but also the general public. So they could be potentially conned out of their hard-earned money, especially because of the parasocial nature of relationships that exist with celebrities, where when a celebrity endorses something, a lot of us want to run and go and buy it because we're so excited that we could have access to a product that somebody that we really regard highly is endorsing. But then what happens when their identity has been stolen to market this product? That means people could be conned out of their money or be influenced to spend money that they traditionally would not spend in that way. And then last, we can look at it from the perspective of a business. So for businesses, deep fake attacks by fraudsters compromise the quality or the value or the brand of a business. So for example, if somebody's identity is stolen and then used to promote a product from a business, or just people or somebody maybe speaks badly against that business within the deep fake attack, then the business does run the risk of being defamed. And then of course, in the long run, that's not good for the business, and it will take a lot to bring to rebuild their brand back up.
And Sylvia, what are your thoughts on the risks of the use of this kind of phenomenon? Where else do you see a potential problem?
Hi, Steve, and thank you for having me today, and thank you, Tunu, for explaining all this. I think you really put it very well, like the range of use cases. And maybe one thing I could add to this, which is maybe more like a framework focusing on intentions and results, maybe to help like put a light on what you're explaining here in terms of range of use cases. And it's a similar framework that we can actually use for cyber policing, social media moderation, ethics in metaverse, and AI ethics in particular. But what I like to do is really identifying segments. Like, for example, the first segment, maybe the most dangerous one, is around agents with bad intentions, like malevolent actors. Yeah. We can think of hackers, scammers, cyber criminals who ask for ransom, or they look to destroy your reputation. Sometimes it can be even at a more collective level, like conducting propaganda and misinformation, or even terrorize populations. And that's maybe what most of us are scared about. But I also want to underline here that it's one segment of use case, not everything that can happen with deepfakes. Then I would say the second segment is more about what I call ruthless or uncaring actors. They think it's fun to play with the technology or with that type of use cases. There's some component of attraction, even maybe sometimes addiction, I would say, without really thinking through the consequences. For example, you can think of what we've seen this past month, creating a deepfake of the Pope, of Donald Trump out of prison, without fully considering out how it could serve misinformation. Also, like we saw another use case, which was creating a new music video with Drake and The Weeknd without assessing the impact on copyright, or even generating a deepfake of global leaders threatening nuclear attacks without thinking about the consequences on international diplomacy. So that would be my second segment. Then you have what kind of a gray zone, which is you don't necessarily mean bad, but if it's good for business, then we close our eyes on the bad aspects. For example, competitors develop AI chatbots and filters, so some actors just want to jump on the bandwagon, and they don't fully develop the use case thoroughly and carefully enough. And for example, in that case, it might not protect the data enough. It might reproduce institutionalized bias. And the book Unmasking AI by Dr. Joy Bolamini, and I know Tunu, you will probably mention it because you are the one referring it to me. But the book is exemplary at exploring our more or less conscious bias and dysfunctionings, such as the male gaze or the coded bias in the data selection and in the algorithm output as we build LLMs. And then my fourth cluster, I would say, is unintended consequences. It's mainly actors mean good, but bad happens. And I'm thinking here, for example, some artists, they accept to deepfake their image and performance against remuneration. In that sense, they harness their identity, so we're fully in the identity economy. But as a consequence, their image loses its rarity. It's not the exceptional Tom Cruise movie of the year or the exclusive Eminem song of the year, but because frequent generated content becomes something common, then it loses its values through inflation. And we can talk more about economics. Tunu, I know you've been talking about this as well, writing about it. But it's really interesting to see about like the more you multiply your image, the less value it gets at some point. And you can think also of the unintended consequences in the porn industry. In order not to exploit underage actors or actresses, those get deepfaked. But as a consequence, things like pedopornography, availability and addiction becomes on the rise with scenarios that we don't have control over anymore. And finally, and that's my last cluster, it's what I would call like the insufficient perspective. And really, us as futurists, we're really interested in this one because we don't have distance enough. We have a hard time figuring out what could be the biggest risk of that type of technology on child development, mental health, cognitive, social, and emotional development, on behaviors more generally. And I'm thinking here, I mentioned it a few times, but of the Proteus effect, it emerged as we developed the metaverse, when the behavior of an individual within virtual worlds is transformed by the characteristic of their avatar. And this also has an impact then in their real life. And another connection is that movie that I'm sure you've seen as well, like the Her movie, and we call it the Her phenomenon, about how we might get attached, how we might bond with non-existing creatures and start to believe in fake proximity with some celebrities because we converse with their avatars, with their Meta AI chatbot, for example, every day, and we might lose track of reality and develop psychosis. So these are kind of the framework I want to add to the conversation because it helps us develop different types of regulations, control, monitoring, and solutions, and education also at this different level of malevolent intentions and results.
What's really interesting for me about that framework is it brings together, first of all, a number of different technologies. So typically, I guess, the use of deepfakes doesn't rely on just one technology. Increasingly, some of those technologies that allow us to do these things become increasingly sophisticated, perhaps they become increasingly autonomous. And there's a risk there, I guess, that we lose control. And the other thing that I think you particularly touched on there was the social factors around this. How relevant socially is it to create some of these influencing avatars, if you like, based on someone's identity that hasn't given authority for that to be used. And I guess from there, I'd also then go into political sphere. And I think you both kind of broadly touched on that. But the ability for fakes of politicians, given the kind of polar opposites we typically see across most elections in many places around the world, the US being just one example. It's really dangerous, potentially, isn't it, to have this kind of technology use and the influence at a social and political level that they potentially allow.
Yes, definitely. I'd love to touch on that because I did speak about that in my most recent blog post where I spoke about propaganda and deepfakes and what that could look like in the face of democracy and truth. And so like the idea that somebody can actually go and create a deepfake, like Sylvia mentioned, maybe of a politician threatening to use nuclear weaponry is in and of itself something that's very scary because a lot of media has moved from traditional media to digital media. And digital media is a lot more difficult to regulate because it's a lot more individualistic. There's no central form of regulation like with the news where specific things, we know what's going to air in the news, whether somebody who's regulating, is this appropriate at the time, is this that, which is a good and a bad thing, just like everything else. But with digital media, that form of regulation doesn't exist. And now people have the ability to create these deep fakes, be it like in terms of audio or audiovisual media at such a low cost. With just a few dollars, less than $20, you can create a deep fake of a celebrity or of a political figure saying something. And especially during times of elections, vulnerabilities run very high because people are either looking for information to confirm why the other side is bad or why the other side should not be voted for or why maybe their agenda is not a benevolent agenda and why the side that they're on is good, or maybe people don't really have a side and are looking to pick a side to see who they're going to vote for. So just this kind of energy of polarization makes people very vulnerable. And then now with these powerful technologies that we have at our use, at our disposal, what happens when people with malevolent intentions use them? And Sylvia I love the frameworks that Sylvia created because they speak a lot about intention versus impact. And when assessing these technologies, deepfake technology, I think a large large part of it is impact, and it's difficult to understand or to fully assess the impact without knowing the intention behind it. So everybody just kind of needs to be on their toes in terms of creating policies and in terms of regulating and in terms of understanding which kind of people are empowered with this technology, and how could this affect democracy? How could this affect political outcomes? And just maybe trying to have a lot more transparency within this space of technology as it relates to politics, especially.
Just building on that point, and I'd like to put this to you, Sylvia, the malevolent use of some of these technologies could be at one level corporate. So these kind of use of deep fakes at the corporate level for either surreptitious marketing or perhaps even more illicit uses, and even at the whim of foreign governments to influence elections. Now, we've spoken earlier on about the identity economy and how the use of these kind of technologies could cost people money effectively. But is that a bigger risk, do you think, the kind of the influencing side, particularly if it's at the political level and influencing the outcome of elections?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. Yes, absolutely. And I think like we underline a lot what the risk could be. I also would like to say that I'm an optimistic futurist, and I also would like to give or share with you a few signals that show that we, like more and more, the general population and the regulators are aware of the risk, and there are a lot of signals that show that things are evolving in a good way. And if you don't mind, I would like to share a few of them, because I don't want to undermine what is done at many levels, from technology leaders to policymakers, and also like institutions. So just a few examples I'm sharing. So first of all, you know how counter technology works. Usually it's a cat and mouse game between countermeasures and countermeasures. And I'm seeing more and more deepfake detectors and scoring of AI-generated content. So already within the technological sphere, a lot is happening. It also means more education. And in California, for sure, and I'm in other parts of the world, I'm sure as well, children receive a class on media literacy and internet safety. Those programs will include more and more awareness towards fake media. And that's really, really a good thing, that at a very early age on, we start to be able to identify and make it something part of our everyday, so that we're able to identify and verify contents. Tunu, you were mentioning social media platforms now send a warning when there's a content that becomes viral too fast or forwarded multiple times, when it is not fact-checked. So those verification systems will need to become even more accurate. The same way we learn how to identify a non-secure connection, an unprotected transaction, or phishing emails, I hope in the future we will have ways to clearly verify and track original content directly in the browser, directly in your email inbox, or directly on your social media platform. I don't want to be delusional either. On top of risk, regulation, and tech solutions, we are very human. We develop behaviors that can be toxic for ourselves and for other in our life in community. Tunu explains it very well in her latest article on the WhatsApp anti, and I really invite you to read this one. But she illustrates how we develop social behaviors and social media tactics that, combined with deepfakes, can exacerbate the harm. But a few other signals, because I want to come back to also the positive aspect of it, of what is going on. In the US, just last week, a bipartisan bill has been proposed, introducing the No Artificial Intelligence, Fake Replicas, and Unauthorized Duplication. It's called the No AI Fraud Act. And the bill is really trying to establish a federal framework to protect American citizens and their individual rights to their likeness and voice against AI-generated fakes and forgeries. And there's a lot to say about this one. Maybe just three aspects that I find really interesting with this act. The first, it's really about not banishing or not saying like the old technology is wrong, but it's really about regaining control about how it is used. It's about asking permission. And also what I find really interesting, and that the third point about that act is it's also about balancing the rights against the First Amendment protections to safeguard speech and innovation. Because we know that a lot of times the First Amendment is called out to say everything is possible to do in the name of innovation. So here it's about replacing identity protection in balance to the First Amendment. And then just a couple more things that you can take a look at, but Google filed recently a patent application for an AI-based system that detects information operations campaigns on social media. And it's really about being able to identify misinformation. And they are really active about like ads disclosure, content labels, and digital watermarking via their Things ID system. You've also probably heard at CES, McAfee just announced that they are working on a project called Mockingbird, which is about AI-powered deepfake audio detection technology. And what's interesting is that the solution itself relies on generative AI. So it's really, once again, this cat and mouse game. And I think that's kind of good for innovation, because we will see more and more countermeasures. Probably we'll see more and more hacking and try to counter this, but there will be a lot of cat and game mouse to see a lot of solutions develop to help us get solutions to verify the content and counter like our exposition to the harm of things.
What I found really nice, and the thought that was going through my head as you were going through some of those descriptions, Sylvia, is that actually we have ultimately humans trying to design technology to do certain things. Some of that's bad, some of it's good, and actually that's been the same since the wheel. So perhaps it's not that much of a surprise that we have a bunch of people doing both those things, trying to find the way to use these technologies for good as well as to use the technologies for bad. Tunu, what are your sense of the opportunities? I think Sylvia really nicely laid out the kind of the regulatory framework that is starting to evolve to help keep us safer. Do you see some opportunities in terms of use case as well?
Yes, I think Sylvia covered it quite well and said a lot. So I just want to bounce off of one of Sylvia's points. And one of the things that she said is with the No AI Fraud Act, one of the things that's being insisted on is not banishing, but rather allowing us to regain content control. And I think that's a very important aspect, because if you look at like X, which was formerly Twitter, or even like WhatsApp, with how they have these different disclaimers. For WhatsApp, they say like forwarded many times or forwarded. And then with X, a lot of times there's a community note that maybe states that this was AI generated, or this is not real, or this and this. But the fact that the post still stays up, the information still stays up. It kind of the way that I see it is this is an amazing opportunity, because it creates an awareness rather than just tearing down all information that might be misinformation or disinformation. We allow both the truth and the other information that's not the truth to coexist, and this kind of creates a framework in people's minds that maybe not everything that I see is true, and the truth and not the truth can both coexist within this space. So I think just the awareness that is being created through a lot of these community notes and through all these tags and through this regulatory the regulatory work that's currently being done is great, because it teaches people to think and maybe not believe everything that they see at first glance, which is something that I think, if you look at maybe the past, didn't exist because maybe misinformation and disinformation did not spread as fast, but misinformation and disinformation has always existed. So just putting it out there that it does exist, and maybe it is a bit more rampant now, I think is quite good in terms of regulation. And yeah, I think that's just what I have to say in terms of regulation. Oh, sorry, another point I thought of as well was in terms of deepfakes and the identity economy, looking at these high-profile individuals. The fact that they potentially everybody stands at risk, but the fact that they potentially have a higher risk, I see it as a very good thing, because they're the ones who a lot of times have the power. They have the resources, they have the power to be able to influence policy. So for example, if a celebrity's image is used badly, they have the power to speak to the people who can take it down, and maybe that could fasten up up the process of regulatory measures, as compared to if it's just like a normal individual who in their own personal life, maybe their image would be tarnished, but by the time you get it to court or something, you don't have as much influence. So I kind of see it as a high risk, high reward situation. With the fact that high profile individuals do stand a bigger risk, I think that will definitely speed up the policy and regulatory process in light of deepfake technology, which is a really optimistic and good way to look at our future.
I think one of the things I think this conversation has done, it's kind of activated my historical brain cell. Because when you were talking about, what information is out there that we can trust or not, what do we believe or not, then I'm taken back to the heyday of the tabloid press in the 70s and 80s. And actually, the way that journalism was conducted then, did you actually know what you were reading in the newspaper was real or not? Perhaps the only difference we have nowadays is the ease to create that information and the pace at which we can create it. And the other thing that struck me throughout the conversation is the kind of the parallels between the deep fakes that we've been talking about, but also digital twins. And we see this technology already used in things like in health to create models of the human body so we can understand how different drug mechanisms work, in research so that we can see how different molecules are acting under different circumstances, different materials, and even in creating digital twins of airports so we can see which model of the airport works most efficiently. So there are some really good reasons why we need to have this technology available to us. And I do think it's a bit of a shame that we end up tarring a kind of a group of technology families almost with the notion of deep fake, which has such a negative connotation. And yet predominantly they can be used for very good things to the benefit of humanity generally. Closing thoughts, and if you've got any closing thoughts about how you think this technology group might evolve in the coming decades, I'd be fascinated to hear those.
Maybe I can try one. So I like all the use cases, positive use cases that you're developing, Steve Wells. And I think indeed in health, in research, we can now create synthetic data for research purpose, surgery preparation and digital twin, new ways of diagnosing, monitoring disease without risking breaches in real patient privacy. That's a use case I'm really excited about. I just want to I know that's something that a lot of people think about deepfakes, and we have been mentioning it. Maybe that's for another episode, but I hear a lot about more eccentric use cases, such as bringing dead people back to life from ancient times, or keeping a digital clone of a loved one alive. And I personally cannot truly believe it's being a mainstream use case. Same as not everyone wants to consult a medium, a channeler, or knows the date of their death. I personally believe it's more of a marginal deepfake application. But there's one I think is interesting that I wanted to add to the full overview that you gave. It's really for media production itself. We know like it can help with cost cutting, on using actors or simplification of production planning and so on. I'm thinking, for streaming services tomorrow, we could have more diversity option that we could offer to the viewers. As you watch a movie, imagine you can choose your character, your actors, and their main characteristic. Imagine you want a replay of Titanic with Taylor Swift in place of Kate Winslet. Or what if you become the main character of the movie and you change its ending to save Leonardo? It would be an immense opportunity for streaming services to extend their features and work on personalization of experience. Just wanted to mention this one, but to know, I'm sure you have also good ones.
Yes, definitely. I was thinking about it in light of creativity and in a very positive, exciting way. And just going off of what you said, I think something very important is that it saves a lot of time as well. And a lot of the creative work, one of the limits of creative work in terms of any form of creative work you're doing is time. So there's a lot of redundancies, there's a lot of just sitting down and having to create the work, especially when it's very complex work like CGI or these things. But now having this technology at our disposal that could allow us to have various different options of one movie created very quickly. I think this would be amazing for creativity because it helps open up your mind, like what other possibilities could exist. And I think we see in terms of creativity, when you're creative in one side of your life, that kind of it has a kind of ripple effect to other sides of your life. So let's say you're watching a movie and then you make yourself the main character instead of somebody else. And it does spark this excitement and this kind of like childlike joy for life and for what technology could have for us. So what could be the ripple effect of that in other aspects of your life? I think it could really it's almost like a spiritual use case for creativity, where we're breaking the bounds of what could be. And I think that could also really help mentally in terms of even the products that we create, even if they're not just technological, but just that knowing that the limit has been extended. If it was here before, now the limit exists here. So what could we create? What could we create with all this technology? What could we create with all this creative energy that we're generating from being able to think outside the box and just leverage this technology for fun? Yeah.
I really loved kind of the way that we've almost come full circle from here's a bunch of technologies doing some weird things that actually we don't really approve of, through to something that's actually really creative and very human. And with that in mind, I think what I would like to do is grab my cape out of the cupboard and start getting changed in telephone boxes, because I think I've got my role in the movie you spoke about, Sylvia. Sylvia, Tunu, thank you so much. We've covered so much ground in less than half an hour. That's been absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much indeed for your time. And thank you everyone for watching and listening. Do let your friends know about the Informing Choices mini-pod, and there'll be another episode along very soon.